It is Tuesday, August 22nd, and time for the AM edition of C2-A-Days from Campus to Canton. I am Nicholas Ian Allen, and it is unfortunately, we had a little bit of construction going on outside, so my apologies if you hear some power tools in the background, but it is game week. Week 0, and it's really starting to feel like it. Mentioned this, tweeted it out last night, and then also in the Campus to Canton Discord. And of course, yesterday's C2-A-Days, yesterday evening, we discussed a couple of depth charts that have been released by the respective schools who are getting ready to kick off their season very soon. One of those was a week 0 opponent or week 0 team, San Diego State. Their opponent, Ohio, has yet, as far as I've been able to tell, to release a, we'll say, official, unofficial depth chart. It is officially released from the program, from the school, but it is also unofficial, and many of them will say that somewhere on the document. It doesn't necessarily mean, even if a guy is listed as the starter at whatever position, that they will be the first player on the field come week 0 or week 1. In fact, San Diego State, as an example, on the offensive side of the ball on their depth chart lists 14 players, 14 different positions. So, obviously they can't have everyone who's listed as a starter take the field at first. So these are important tools. We do make adjustments to our team profiles in many cases. We don't necessarily make every single change or adjustment based on these team depth charts. We do take care to analyze and formulate our projections, our idea of where players should be slotted. And, sometimes we make a decision that may not entirely line up with what the school has released for our own reasons. But more often than not, especially at, positions that are going to change our projections, quarterback being the biggest piece, but also, we want to make sure that for the folks who are looking at our information, the CFB Winning Edge team profiles and projected depth charts for college fantasy football purposes, DFS, all that good stuff, and to make sure our projections are as good as possible. We do like to certainly take those into account. Before we dive into some of the depth charts that were released recently, a follow-up from San Diego State, as we mentioned yesterday, Kurt D. Kinney of the San Diego Union Tribune responded to a follower or tweet that asked about Jalen Armstead not being listed on the Aztecs week 0 depth chart at running back. And San Diego State lists 2 different running back positions, actually 3 if you count fullback. And Armstead, who I noted earlier in fall camp, had really gotten some positive praise, some buzz. So a little bit of a surprise. Wondered if this particular person who tweeted out Kenny asked, hey Kirk, any reason Jalen Armstead isn't on the depth chart at either running back spot, or did he just not make the cut? So Kenny, who of course does a great job covering the Aztecs, said the competition at running back is very close, and each guy seems to bring something a little different to the mix. Keenan Christon has been viewed as number 1 ever since spring. I think the 2 deep is a reflection of how Cam Davis and Martin Blake have come on in preseason camp, but I still expect Jalen Armstead to get carries against Ohio, and that's another important note, I think, when we look at these depth charts is, just because a guy is number 1 doesn't mean they're going to get 75% of the snaps or carries. There could be a situation, and San Diego State probably among those, where they're going to spread it around a little bit. So following up on San Diego State, Keenan Christon is listed as a co-starter at the RBF position with Cam Davis. Cam Davis is listed as the starter at the RBT position, with Martin Blake behind him. Starting receivers, looks like Philip Wesley, Mekhi Shaw, and Josh Nicholson. They have two tight end positions featured, the T and the H, with Mark Redmond starting at the T and Jay Rudolph at the H. And then, of course, no surprise at quarterback, Jalen Maiden, who came in and took over as a starter midway through last season, is going to be starting for the Aztecs in week 0. As I said, we don't have an Ohio official depth chart, but no surprise. I mean, I think we've mentioned it on this show, certainly mentioned it on the CFB Winning Edge podcast and some others, that Curtis Rourke, the the starting quarterback at Ohio, is reportedly fully healthy. I believe Pete Thamel put out a tweet yesterday about that, but that had been well understood, I think, for a while, that he was going to be ready to play in that game. So we'll wait on the official or unofficial depth chart from Ohio coming up soon, hopefully. But as of right now, it looks like San Diego State is the only one in that matchup who's released one. At Hawaii, fellow Mountain West conference team, who is going to be taking on Vanderbilt in week 0, did not see a Vanderbilt depth chart released by time it was time to record. But Hawaii has been one that a lot of folks have been interested in CFF circles. Certainly the move to the run and shoot, Timmy Chang, head coach, now calling the plays. It's been a little bit murky, especially at the wide receiver position, which, in the run and shoot, and most recently we saw it at Washington State with Nick Rolovich, who previously was at Hawaii. Everybody wants to know who are the slot receivers. That has been the most productive position in this offense traditionally. But there are some changes at Hawaii. First of all, traditional run and shoot is a 10 personnel system, basically 100% of the time, which means one running back, 0 tight ends, and 4 wide receivers. But Hawaii's official or unofficial depth chart that was released is 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end, and 3 wide receivers. So there have been some notes, some local media have run some features on the change in Hawaii at the offensive philosophy. Timmy Chang, who prior to returning to Hawaii was with Jay Norvell at Nevada, briefly followed him to Colorado State before getting the job at Hawaii. So it's interesting that it's sort of a blend a little bit with Chang's run and shoot background. He played with June Jones at Hawaii in the early 2000s, and then has been kind of, in the air raid family, with Norvell most recently. But so it's probably going to be a little bit of a blend in what we're going to see, a little less of that just traditional run and shoot. And as a result, maybe that slot position, it might not be such a slam dunk. I mean, it probably will be. We expect, Hawaii to throw the football quite a bit, especially as thin as they are at the running back position, but behind Tylan Hines, as we've discussed before. But anyway, and Hawaii in this particular depth chart does not differentiate the wide receiver positions between outside, inside. We did mention earlier in the week, or last week, I suppose it was, that Stephen McBride, who is listed as one of those starting wide receivers, has been playing an outside position. He and Alex Perry, we mentioned, were featured. They are 1 and 2 on this depth chart, ahead of Jalen Walthall, who is a returning starter for the Rainbow Warriors. So a little bit of a surprise there. One place where it's not surprising, Jonah Pinoque is listed as a starting wide receiver. Perhaps in the slot, it's either he or Pofele Ashlock, who was a surprise on the depth chart, redshirt freshman out of Euless, Texas, was sort of the unknown name, unexpected name at the top of one of these particular wide receiver positions in the depth chart. But Jonah Pinoque is listed ahead of Chucky Hines, who some folks have speculated could push for a wide receiver position starting, and Carson Pupanu. And then the wide receiver spot currently headed up by Pofele Ashlock is backed up by Kawale Nishigawa, Gaya, and Nick Cynical. All of those players have been considered, potential starters. So it would, I think, be smart to assume that Hawaii is going to roll in quite a few of these guys. We're probably going to see a fair amount of, snaps for backups, maybe even some of these guys who are the threes, like Walthall, who's experienced, Keenikal, who's experienced. But still, certainly important to note who is potentially going to be on the field for that first snap, and a name that was surprising to a lot of folks is Ashlock. So he is potentially one to note. Pinoque, I think pretty clearly the wide receiver one, most likely. McBride, I think, is got that potential as well if he emerges, but sounds like from one of those outside positions. So we'll see. And then Grayson Morgan is the tight end, which, again, the traditional run and shoot does not feature a tight end. Traditional air raid, I suppose, doesn't either. But the tight end, of course, has been something that we've seen from Norvell's offense recently. Also, Hawaii last year used a tight end in its primary offensive formations as well. The quarterback, unsurprisingly, Braden Shager. He might have been the first named starter through fall camp. So it's Shager at quarterback, Hines at running back, backed up by Landon Sims, who just recently moved over from tight end to help add a little depth there. The starting wide receivers, again, Stephen McBride, Jonah Pinoque, Pofele Ashlock, and at tight end, it's Grayson Morgan, backed up by Devin Tuefe. So moving on to Jacksonville State. Jacksonville State and UTEP will face off on week 0, and we do have a depth chart released by both teams, which is nice. Certainly good to note. At Jacksonville State, a couple of surprises. The Gamecocks playing their first game as an FBS team and a Conference USA member. Will be a conference game against the Miners. And then Zion Webb, starting quarterback, returning starter at quarterback in his 7th year of eligibility, has kind of an unexpected or next to his name, Logan Smothers, who I believe got a mention in our very first C2-A-Days as having just a great start to fall camp. Seemingly has pushed for playing time and has pushed Webb, who has been, a multi-year starter. Obviously he's in his 7th year, so has dealt with some injuries. But by all indications, in the spring, they expected him to get a waiver to be eligible for that 7th year and expected him to start. Sounded like he got the vast majority of the reps in the spring. But Smothers, who was transferred in from Nebraska, immediately impressed and potentially is the quarterback of the future ahead of Tayshawn Smoot. And I suppose you could say the quarterback potentially of the present. So we'll see if he gets some snaps against UTEP as well. See if Webb has to split duties at quarterback in week 0. Certainly something to wonder and watch for there. At the running back position, another surprise. Anwar Lewis is not at all listed among the 4 running backs in this Jackson State depth chart. There have been tried to do a little more research on this. I think we might have mentioned very early on in C2-A-Days, and I couldn't find reference to it when trying, that Lewis was dealing, I think, with an injury. I didn't remember it sounding significant enough that he was expected to miss a bulk of a chunk of time, or potentially even the first game of the season. But if he's not listed on the depth chart, that's a pretty strong indication that he probably will not play against UTEP. So he is one of the higher rated running backs in our video game ratings, our overall individual player ratings in the CFB Winning Edge team profiles. So Jacksonville State will potentially miss him as a little bit of a weaker team without him. Ron Wiggins and Malik Jackson, a recent transfer from ULM, are listed as the Wiggins and then or Jackson atop the running back depth chart, followed by Juwan Evans or Kenyon Sims. So that report, that article that we mentioned very early on, 3 weeks ago now, maybe in C2-A-Days, mentioned that there would be maybe a three-headed running back committee. It's down potentially to two with Wiggins and Jackson, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see a little bit of Evans or Sims in addition. At the wide receiver positions, Jacksonville State, pretty run-heavy team, so not as likely to perhaps put up big passing numbers, but Sterling Galvin is a returning starter at wide receiver. He is listed there. Michael Petway is an experienced player. Also, the sophomore is listed as a starter. And then Quentin Lane is as well. A little bit of a surprise because I believe we mentioned that Gerard Bowie, who was a Division II All-American and sounded like was just really coming into his own at Jacksonville State's fall camp early on, listed as a third stringer. So it's going to be Galvin or Perry Carter, veteran and I believe former ULM Warhawk as well. Petway, and then Quentin Lane or Brock Rechsteiner as the starting wide receivers. Sean Brown, returning starter at tight end. But the big item to note, Anwar Lewis, it appears, is not going to be available for the Gamecocks in week 0. At UTEP, who will, of course, be facing those Jacksonville State Gamecocks. Not a lot of surprises. Gavin Hardison is listed as the starting quarterback. He's going to be making his 31st career start, 33rd career appearance. Similarly experienced running back Deion Hankins is clearly listed as the starter. And then Torrance Burgess Jr. or Mike Franklin are backing up Hankins. Burgess played in a couple of games previously. Franklin is an incoming 6'2", 225-pound junior from Contra Costa College, has gotten some buzz this fall as well. The leading wide receiver, Tyron Smith, is back, will be making his 17th career start, it would appear. Kelly Akiari and Marcus Bellin are listed as starters at the other wide receiver positions outside of Tyron Smith. Jeremiah Bullard, Amari White, and Justine Clark are the backups. Zach Fryer listed at tight end, and then Marcus Vinson, who we mentioned had really, really impressed head coach Dana Dimmel, is currently listed as the number 2. We thought that, according to an earlier report, perhaps Vinson was moving into one of those starting spots, but it appears that he is likely to be behind Zach Fryer come game time. San Jose State plays USC on Saturday evening, and we do have an unofficial, they say it big bold letters, SJSU unofficial depth chart. And perhaps they want to make sure that that Justin Lockhart is listed as a starter, but as we've mentioned often over the last 3 weeks, he has been limited in fall camp. It is unclear whether or not he will play. If Lockhart is unavailable, looks like Isaac Jernigan would probably step up into his wide receiver spot. Nick Nash, the former quarterback, and Charles Ross are listed as the other 2 starters, with Malachi Miller and Brandon Alvarez behind the two of them respectively. Dominic Mazzotti and Sam Olson are listed as co-starters at tight end. So especially if Lockhart is unavailable or limited less than 100%, don't be surprised if we see both tight ends on the field at the same time relatively often. Kyrie Robinson is the clear starter at running back, Jabari Bates and Quali Conley. Conley is a transfer from the FCS level. Those two are listed as number 2 running backs behind Robinson. Chevin Cordero is, of course, the returning starter at quarterback. A little bit of a surprise to me. It sounded like Oregon transfer Jay Butterfield was really struggling early on in camp, and thought that he was perhaps a clear number 3 behind Tyler Voss. But according to this, again, unofficial depth chart, Butterfield and Voss are listed as the number 2 behind Cordero. So that is sort of the roundup. We mentioned Notre Dame yesterday. They, of course, released their official, unofficial depth chart on Monday. Navy did previously last week. UMass is one more team that released a depth chart. UMass plays New Mexico State in prime time on ESPN on Saturday. No real surprises. We mentioned Tyson Pomachan was named the starting quarterback by head coach Don Brown. The running back position lists Kyron Lynch Adams, formerly named Kyron Adams in all of our team profiles and most rosters and things of that nature, is the starting running back. Greg DeRosiers Jr. is the second running back listed. Jalen John and Jackson Paradas, 2 transfers from Arizona and Buffalo, respectively, are 3rd and 4th in the running back pecking order. The starting wide receivers are George Johnson III, a returning starter, Mark Pope, who most recently was at Jackson State, previously Miami, highly rated recruit coming out of high school. He is in his first year at UMass and is starting at the wide receiver A position. Anthony Sampson, one of quite a few Arizona transfers, who had history with Don Brown when he was defensive coordinator at Arizona in 2021, is the starter listed at wide receiver Z. The tight end is last year's starting quarterback, Gino Campiati. If you have not heard, is converted to quarterback when the Minutemen brought in Pomachan and Carlos Davis, an FCS transfer, to compete for the quarterback job. Campiati did make the move, has played a little tight end or receiver in his past. I believe started his career maybe at Northern Arizona. So has some experience there. Be interesting to see what he looks like, and potentially if UMass does some interesting things with Campiati as the starting quarterback. So that is the rundown for depth charts. One team playing in week 0 that has yet to release a depth chart, but we have gotten news that at Louisiana Tech, they're going to be a little shorthanded at the running back position. Jenna Vitamonte of KTL News passed along a quote from head coach Sonny Cumbie about who the Bulldogs will expect to take the field against FIU on Saturday. This is a quote, Charvis Thornton, Keith Willis, Jacob Fields has transitioned from defense to offense. Fields was most recently listed as a corner. So I'm excited to see what they do, according to Cumbie. It's really those 3 guys. Keldrick Moody has been very steady for us throughout this time since we've been here. So Thornton is experienced, had some strong moments last year. Willis and Fields are freshmen, so we will get a pretty early look potentially at a couple of true freshmen for Louisiana Tech, with Marquise Crosby considered out. Tyree Shelton, the transfer from Miami of Ohio, is questionable, but it's sounding like probably more likely than not going to play. Continuing quotes from Cumbie, says it's unfortunate with Tyree and Marquise because they were having great springs and great summers. We're going to hold it down best we can until we get those guys back, and have a lot of faith and are confident in Charvis and the rest of the guys in that room. So I would expect that Charvis Thornton potentially in line for a fairly heavy workload for Louisiana Tech. Of course, they've got a new quarterback, Hank Bachmeier, a couple of really quality receivers in Smoke Morris, Cyrus Allen, some depth at that position as well. So it'll be, not necessarily just leaning on Thornton, but would expect he's going to get the vast majority of the work out of the running back position. All right, moving on to a few teams who will not kick off until week 1. UTSA, Greg Luca of the San Antonio Express News tweeted a quote from wide receiver Jacorian Clark, who's one of quite a few experienced and talented UTSA players who've been dealing with some injuries. And Clark is quoted as saying, "I'm still praying on it," talking about his status for week 1. Says, "I haven't gotten the go ahead, but taking it day by day, time will tell." So Clark, as Luca mentioned, of course, suffered a gruesome knee injury, his word there, gruesome, 10 months ago against Houston. So wouldn't be a shock if Clark isn't quite ready to take the field on that week 1 date, but hopefully we will see him back sooner rather than later. The Roadrunners certainly could use him in that receiving core, especially with Zachary Franklin having transferred to Ole Miss. At Virginia, Jackie Franciulli of the 247 site covering the Who's had a follow-up on a name we've mentioned before, Chico Bennett Jr., one of the top defensive players for the Cavaliers, really all ACC caliber defender, was spotted in street clothes on Monday afternoon, but was walking around the field, according to Franciulli. Did not have crutches, just a wrap around his right leg. She went on to report that Virginia head coach Tony Elliott did not have a timeline for Bennett's return to practice, but will not apparently be able to participate in football activities for 10 days. So it sounds like Bennett is going to be out week 1. That's important because he's a 90-plus rated player in our individual player ratings. Virginia, the defense is the strength of that team, and he's definitely among, if not the best defender that they've got. So that week 1 game against Tennessee, Virginia is going to be less than full strength, most likely, on defense. At Cal, a quick follow-up from a couple of spots. The Cal Rivals site and Matt Marino mentioned that on Monday, quarterback Sam Jackson V, who had been scuffling a little bit and kind of losing his grip potentially on the inside track to that starting quarterback job, apparently had one of his best practices of fall camp. And it was potentially needed because, as Jackson Moore of Bear Territory noted over the weekend from some stats from the scrimmage, both Ben Finley, the NC State transfer, and redshirt freshman Fernando Mendoza, seemingly, at least statistically, outplayed Jackson in the most recent scrimmage. Jackson completed 10 of 21 passes, according to Moore, for 108 yards. Mendoza was 10 of 19 for 144 and 2 touchdowns. Finley, 11 of 21 for 180 yards and 2 touchdowns. So Moore did note that Cal head coach Justin Wilcox was asked whether or not he would consider playing more than one quarterback in week 1. And according to Wilcox, quote, "We'll consider about anything right now. We're looking for the guys to keep competing and improving and for somebody to separate themselves. I'd say everything is on the table right now. We'll see what happens in the next week or so." So Sam Jackson is a very exciting player. We got to see just glimpses of it at TCU when he transferred into Cal. Seemed like a really great opportunity to solidify himself in the spring, potentially as that top quarterback. But Ben Finley comes in, and also Mendoza have pushed him. It certainly sounds like, and Jackson just hasn't quite put any distance between he and the other two. So potentially we'll see multiple guys in week 1. But Jackson, personally, from my perspective, sort of rooting for him. I feel like his upside is most exciting, and certainly he's been the favorite in CFF circles. There's definitely a lot of excitement for his running ability specifically. Final note from Oklahoma, wanted to mention a recent depth chart prediction put forth by George Stoya of Sooner Scoop. There's been some wonder who's going to be the running back for the Sooners this year. And there was a question in this Q&A mailbag post by Stoya earlier in the week. The question was asked, is Javante Barnes the starter, or do you see it as more of a split carry situation between he and Gavin Sawchuk? Well, Stoya went a third direction and said, I actually think that Marcus Major is going to start. He's had a great camp from what I understand. We'll see, because Barnes has also had a solid camp, but Sawchuk has been banged up and has missed some of fall camp. So I bet we see Major and Barnes split the load to start the year. So little unexpected, potentially, at least by some of Stoya's readers, who felt that Barnes and Sawchuk were clearly the 1 and 2, or some combination thereof. And this is another one of those situations where one of these guys may take the first snap. Doesn't necessarily mean that they will end up as the leading rusher on a particular Saturday or for the season, or that will eventually emerge as the go-to player. But at least according to Stoya, who follows the team closely at Sooner Scoop, Marcus Major, and he's not the first to mention Marcus Major. I believe Phil Steele has him listed as the starter as well. But certainly plenty of folks out there, including, I know, our own Nate Marquise, who I believe is highest on Barnes, maybe Sawchuk, I don't know, but not Major. I know that for sure. So we'll see how it shakes out. But at least as of right now, Major has a couple of supporters to take that first snap for the Sooners on September 2nd. So that will do it for us this morning, Tuesday. We will be back this afternoon. Hopefully we'll get a few more depth charts potentially. And if so, we'll certainly discuss. Still waiting on USC, Vanderbilt, New Mexico State, Ohio, a few others. But one big item of note today, CFB Winning Edge team projections will be going live pretty soon, but hopefully later this morning on the Campus to Canton Discord. So if you've followed CFB Winning Edge in the past, if you've supported it, then same type setup, but now will be listed and sent out to our C2C Winning Edge tier members via the Discord. We'll also be hosting an office hours weekly, couple of hours to set aside and answer any questions about our projections. If you are unfamiliar with what they are, want to be able to walk you through our 3 different projection models, what they mean, what they're sort of designed to hopefully show, give us a little bit of a different look, 3 different views of a particular matchup. But we've got projected point spreads, three sets of those. Also totals, over and under as well. We do keep track of everything. It's not necessarily, with a betting that's not necessarily forefront in my mind making these projections, but that is how we grade it. We grade against the spread, our win-loss record in all 3 models, in the over-under, to see how we're doing, see what we might need to change in the future, learn from our mistakes, and then see whether or not we're on the right track with our projections. So look for those in the C2C Winning Edge tier channel in the Discord. And of course, if you haven't already, do please check us out at campustocanton.com and check out that C2C Winning Edge tier as well. So again, this is Nicholas Ian Allen for Campus to Canton. Hope everyone has a wonderful Tuesday, and we will be back with you this evening.